Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Perpetual Chess. We have an old friend joining us who I will introduce in a minute. First, as always, wanted to thank our sponsors, Chessable.com. We're recording a couple weeks in advance of when this will be released. But as we record, just wanted to remind you about a few new courses. Recent guest, Grandmaster Ludwig Hammer, has a beginner-oriented course on E6 against everything. And of course, by the time you hear this, you guys will know what happened in the World Championship. Don't tell me, since I'm recording here on December 4th. But again, if you want to review what happened, there's a free Chessable course from a friend of the pod. I am Andres Toth. And if you become a Chessable Pro member, be sure to use the link in the description to help support the pod. And that unlocks lots of features such as Puzzle Connect. As for our guest this week, so he's an award-winning chess teacher. He's the Chess Educator of the Year by UT Texas at Dallas. He won a U.S. Chess Lifetime Achievement Award. And the reason he won these awards is because in the 1990s, he coached this school, CES 70 in the Bronx, which is a public school from one of the poorest districts in the country. They went on to win many national championships, and this chess team changed the course of many kids' lives. His new book, Sunrise in the Bronx, tells their story and reflects on these experiences. After his time at CES 70, our guest was a supervisor for an organization called Chess in the Schools, supervised me, among many others. He was a mentor to me, as we will probably discuss eventually. And then he went on to head the Powerhouse chess program at the Dalton School in New York City. These days he's retired, other than writing this book, although somehow still seems to be extremely busy, as we will discuss. But without further ado, I'm excited to welcome to the program my first supervisor at my first chess job, David MacEnulty. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Ben. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. We've seen each other occasionally over the years, but I really enjoyed reading your book because even though you used to come to my classes, again, I'm a 24-year-old kid, have no clue what I'm doing, and you would come to my classes and give me very good constructive feedback. But there's a lot that I didn't know about your background, David, that I found out in this book. So why don't we begin? Maybe you could tell the story of how you accidentally became a chess teacher in your 40s.
It wasn't indeed an accident, as is most of my life. I was friends with Bruce Pandolfini for many years. And one day he came to me and he said, I'm desperate. I've got a room full of kids and I can't go. I need help. Will you go teach? And I thought he must have been out of his mind because I was just a guy who liked to play chess. I was not a professional. I was certainly not a master. But he was desperate and he convinced me to go. So I did. And I loved it. It was great fun. It was an amazing experience looking at these little minds trying to figure out what I was showing them that Bruce had told me to show them. And it was just exciting to see the activity going on in their heads. And when he asked me to do it a second time, I thought, oh, of course, I'll do this. The first time I thought, you're out of your mind. I can't do that. Right. I don't know how. The second time I was like, oh, yeah, please. And I was working in real estate at the time and not really enjoying that. I'm not really a business person. We had been in the arts in my family. That's all we ever did. So now I found myself with a survival job in real estate. And Bruce said, why don't you quit doing that and come work for me being the American Chess Foundation. And so I said, sure, I'll try that. And then one of the schools that I was assigned to, back in those days, we went to one school for 4 to 6 weeks and taught chess and gave the kids books and chess sets. And then we walked away. And that's clearly not going to get a whole lot of people learning chess. It takes a lot longer than that. But one of the schools that I was assigned to, IBM had put money into that district, and that allowed me to go there every week for the full year. And at the end of the year, the team came in 13th place at the national tournament in the JV section, not championship. But that was quite an amazing event for them. The way they were jumping up and down, you would have thought we came in first. And at the end of the year, Sylvia Simon, who was a brilliant educator, she was the principal at the school. She asked me to quit working for Bruce and get certified as a Board of Ed teacher and come teach chess in her school. So that made me the first person actually sanctioned by the Board of Ed to teach chess as an exclusive subject. it was an amazing transformation for me. I suddenly found what I really wanted to do all my life.
Yeah, and for context, as David mentions in the book, so comes from a family that works in the arts, and David was a stage actor, I found out, for something like 10 years, and also
Yes,
had a background as a musician.
right.
So yeah, I can see why real estate wasn't your
No,
calling.
no, but it did
Yeah,
make money, and I had a
yeah.
family. I had a wife and children to feed. So
And
um,
how was it on the family front making that transition?
uh, that was a little shaky, but it was really necessary. I mean, real estate really was not where I belonged. Um, so
And then,
we
oh,
made the
sorry, go ahead.
transition.
Okay, and so for getting the certification to work in a larger capacity at CS 70, like
Mhm.
was that night classes? Did you have to take a discrete time? How did that work?
Yes, I did have to take a bunch of education courses to get board certified, and that took me a couple of years to fulfill all of the requirements. But I have to say, um, those courses were amazing because they were all taught by UFT teachers, United Federation of Teachers. They were all union members. They'd been in the classroom for 20 years at least. They really knew what they were talking about. And so I got just fantastic ideas from those courses.
Yeah.
It was really mind bending. So when I hear people attacking teachers, I say, you have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, having taught in enough classrooms
Yes.
without your educational credentials, I certainly have immense respect for what they do and how hard it is to navigate. And for listeners who, I think a decent number of people who listen, of course, we have a lot of chess parents listening. We also have a lot of educators. Um,
Mhm.
was there anything in particular you picked up that you could share? I mean, there's tons of little tidbits throughout the book.
Wow. Well, there's so many, it's hard to pick just one. But I suppose one of the most important ones was the notion of dignifying the incorrect response.
Yes. Yeah.
Because a lot of times you ask a question and a kid will give an answer that just makes no sense at all. It's not related to what you just asked. And you have to give them a response that makes them feel good. Nothing ruins a class more than a bunch of children who are afraid to say something because the teacher is going to demean them or put them down or disregard them. Um, and that really leads into the second thing, which is every child in the classroom has to know that you really care about them. They've really got to get that you're on their side, and if you do that, you can make a lot of other mistakes.
Right. Yeah. And you tell some good
Um,
stories of you going out of your way to make the kids feel comfortable, especially as you mentioned, because it's an underprivileged school. A lot of the kids were dealing with a lot of things at home that made them untrustworthy. So yeah, it's really some touching stories in there. And David, returning to sort of your chess biography, so as you get
mhm,
to CES 70,
right.
so were you teaching in the classroom as well as like
Absolutely.
non-chess subjects?
Absolutely. No, I was only teaching chess. Once in a while, Sylvia would ask me to teach a reading lesson. Once in a while, I had to do a math class, but 99% of my teaching was chess.
And how many classes a day were you doing?
I did the limit.
Wow.
This was a very large school. We had 10 classes on a grade level. There were about 1,800 kids in the whole school, which is an enormous number for a K through 5 school. So I taught probably at least 5 classes a day.
Okay. Yeah, and for context for listeners, so this school is just a few blocks from Yankee Stadium. I often would
Right.
take the subway to Yankee Stadium. So not only was David my supervisor, but I taught at CES 70 after all their success. So yeah, know the school well, and again, the book brought back a lot of memories. So do you think you were the first full time chess teacher at a public school?
I was the first person to be hired by the Board of Ed to teach chess. Yes. Now, Teresa Easton, also in the same district in the Bronx, had been teaching chess in her classroom, but she was a regular classroom teacher and she
Mhm.
had incorporated chess in her lessons. So I don't want to say that I was the only one doing it, but I was the only one for whom that was the single subject.
And did the principal have sort of unilateral authority to create this position, or did she have to get someone to sign off on it? Do you remember?
Yes, we were what was called a school-based management school, which meant Sylvia had a little more leeway than some other principals. And when she hired me, of course, it was rather difficult because you have to hire somebody from a list. And so she said she wanted me to teach, and they said, well, you've got to go through the list and see who's got seniority over him. And she said, well, who do you have who can teach drama? And they said, nobody. And he said, fine. She said, fine. That's what I want him to do. Now, what's funny about that is that she did not know at that point that I had been a member of Actors Equity and SAG and AFTRA. Right. She did not know that I had been a professional actor and had gone to graduate school in theater.
Huh. That's very funny. So you get there, and so the program is sort of in its very beginning stages before you become full-time. Mm-hmm. And you write in the book about how eventually people were very generous and you raised funds and were able to bring in master level teachers. By the way, you were like 1,600. Is that right, David?
Well, my official rating is something like, I don't know, mid 15s, 16s, somewhere in there. Okay. But the unfortunate thing is, and every chess player has these stories, I guess. But when I first knew that I was going to be teaching chess, I immediately entered tournaments at the Marshall and the Manhattan. And I entered one at the Marshall for players under 1,600, and I won it. And then I entered two at the Manhattan Chess Club, and I won for under 1,800, and I won both of those. But Billy Callias was the manager of the club at the time, and he didn't get the paperwork in for those two tournaments. And I also played a match with an expert, and we drew. I won two, he won two. Billy didn't survive. He went into a coma and never came out of it. So that's why those results didn't come in. So my actual playing strength, as verified by those tournaments, would probably be somewhere in the upper 1800s. But the results never got turned in, so I'm officially like a 1,600 something.
Okay,
which is pretty mediocre.
Yeah, but a fantastic teacher, as I can attest, which is far more important when you're dealing with throngs of new students. And one thing I wondered is because I, in addition to not being aware of your prior careers, I didn't obviously even the New York chess scene becomes pretty small if you stick around it long enough. Mm-hmm. So I knew you were friends with Bruce Pandolfini, of course, the legendary teacher these days, but I didn't know that you guys went back that far. So did you know him when he got you into chess teaching? Did you know him, I guess, from chess circles, or how were you already friends with Bruce?
I think the way we met, and neither of us really clearly remembers this, I think the way we met is that I had a friend who took a lesson from him, and then he convinced me to take a lesson from Bruce. And I remember I had a couple of lessons with Bruce, and then we just remained friends. But I still remember he showed me the game between Alyekin and Capablanca and Lasker, where Alyekin has this wild queen diagonal move that just tore poor Lasker apart. I still remember that moment. Yeah.
And then, of course, Bruce obviously went on to tremendous things.
Bruce is amazing. Yes.
Yeah. Definitely a chess treasure. So bringing it back to when you're getting started at the 70s. So then you're in there every day, teaching kids chess. What were the biggest challenges in terms of getting the program up and running?
Wow. There were so many challenges. One was lack of resources. I was a one-man band for the first 2 or 3 years. And that was really hard because, you have to bring the kids to tournaments on weekends. You have to analyze their games at the tournament. You have to analyze more games over the rest of the weekend and come back and prepare your lessons for the team. And then you have to prepare the lessons for all the classrooms. And it was a monumental task. The preparation was overwhelming. I mean, it was, a 10-hour day would be a short day.
Wow.
And also, one of the problems is that you're dealing with wonderful children in many ways, but children who are really facing terrible challenges. I mean, when you've got a 97% poverty rate, that means that there is a lot wrong with that neighborhood. The crime is very high. The education level is obviously not very high. Respect for the school was not the greatest. There were just so many things to deal with, and to expect a school to overcome all of the sociological, all the political things that transpire against these families and consequently their children. It's an overwhelming task. I mean, the teachers really have a lot to do, a lot to overcome. And frankly, if we don't pour really massive resources into it, you're not going to get the children that you should have, because these kids are great. They just need the resources. I mean, when I was teaching at Dalton, there was like no limit to what we could do.
Right.
For a country like America to not put the resources into our children, I just don't understand.
Yeah. And as I taught some of the classroom classes at CES 70 again,
Right.
probably about 10 years after you came, definitely in 2001, actually, because I remember when my first day at the principal's office, this is my first school, my first day. Can you guess which day or perhaps you remember which day in 2001 it was, David?
Oh, no. September 11th.
Yeah, September 11th.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, I walked into the school office, and they showed on and the secretaries were watching TV, and they said, a building flew into the World Trade Center. And I said, oh, that's interesting. And then we went in and did the meeting. Like we didn't realize the impact.
Yeah.
We didn't realize the world had changed.
Yes.
And it was only half an hour later, when the meeting was over, that we realized that, first of all, there was a second plane, and it's a much bigger story than I had processed immediately.
Yeah, this was definitely a change in the world.
Yeah. But anyway, that's getting ahead of what was occurring. Getting back to describing the school, the reason I brought that up is because I remember there were like 33 kids in the class.
Right.
And these days, my kids do go to public schools here in New Jersey. And I grew up in Center City, Philadelphia. I ended up going to a good school, a magnet school, but there were 30 kids always or more in the class there. But here in New Jersey, I couldn't believe it because of property taxes are really high. That even at public schools, it's like 20 kids in the class and 2 teachers. And it just makes such a massive difference.
Sure. Absolutely. Class size and ratio of student to teacher is critical for the success of the children.
Yeah. So how did you learn to manage that many kids?
Very slowly and very painfully. Classroom management is not something that came naturally to me. And, fortunately, I had a really great mentor at the school, Eric Whitney, who was the UFT union representative. And he was a brilliant, brilliant teacher. And he would come in and watch me, and I would make horrible mistakes, and he would take me out, and we would argue like crazy, and he was always right and I was always wrong. But I had to listen to him. I had to learn from him. And he just gave me so much advice that was so helpful. And I think every teacher really needs that kind of background. Somebody who really knows what they're doing to help them through those first years.
Yeah, there is almost an element of it being like a chaotic chess position when you try to manage these like massive classes of kids. And to your point about you having a lot to learn, obviously when I came to chess in the schools, then you helped teach me, but I haven't taught in classrooms in some years, but I never reached a point where I considered it a strong suit. It's just so challenging.
No, classroom management is a really important thing. And it's just really hard to deal with it first time you see something. I mean, the kids just ate me alive that first year.
Right.
It was terrible.
Yeah. But then the school starts to have some success. I mean, obviously it's a really hard job, even when the school is succeeding and starting to accrue
Mhm.
state and national titles. So I'm guessing, I mean, there is one moment that you described towards the end of the book that we'll get to, but was there a moment where you felt like you made it, or is there too much daily grind for that sort of feeling?
Um, sort of, I never felt that I made it. Um, because even if you're playing with the Yankees and you win the World Series, you got to train for the next year.
Yeah.
So after every tournament, however well we had done, and after my third year, we were doing pretty well at every tournament. But I would always tell the kids, listen, this is great, but what got us here is what's going to keep us going there. You can't let up. You can't say, hey, we're great, because being great once, you got to do it again and again and again. There's no let up. You can never rest.
Yeah, that's good advice. And by the way, for listeners, we should say they're always interested, David. Like, what rating level is this book for? Are there chess diagrams? Is it going to be an audiobook? Is it going to be on Kindle? So, first of all, I should say the book is 100% words, which most of my
Right.
listeners are looking for books like that, at least as an occasional
Hmm.
release. Very, very well written and very engaging storytelling with good life advice, even if you're not someone who teaches chess or someone whose kids. Um, Play chess. And as to the Kindle and audiobook questions, it would be good for those. Do you know if it will be in those formats?
I've spoken to the publishers about making it into an audiobook, and I may end up doing that myself. I may end up doing the reading.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah,
uh,
you have a good voice
I'm,
for it.
I'm,
So,
we're,
yeah.
we're talking. I'm talking about that right now with some people.
Okay, great. And what about Kindle, like electronic version?
I have no idea. That's
Okay.
I,
I'm
I,
guessing, I didn't check with New in Chess. I probably should have, but I'm guessing it will make its way
I
to
hope
the
I hope it
Kindle.
does.
Yeah, and it would be again a good format for
Hmm.
that as well. But in whatever format you can get it, definitely enjoyed and recommend it. And you have again some really, I felt, um, meaningful reflections just about like the role that you see chess playing in their lives and the skills that you see chess teaching. One of them that you
Yes.
talked about was emotional intelligence. Like,
Hmm.
could you? I mean, you tell so many stories in the book, but whether it's a memorable story or just if you could generally reflect on what kind of skills you felt like chess helped these kids develop.
Well, it's a really broad range, but when I first started, I knew, of course, that it would help them with their academics. Learning to see things in sequence, learning to think logically, learning to recognize patterns, all these things. I knew that would help them with their math, with their reading, with their science, with virtually every subject. What surprised me was how big an impact it had on their emotional development and their socialization. um, because I mean, as you know, as a fairly successful chess player, every game there's a lot on the line, and there's a tremendous amount of emotion involved, and that's where emotional intelligence comes in. And so, when kids learn how to accept defeat and use it the right way, not to say, "Oh, I'm terrible, I'm stupid, I'm useless," but to say, "Oh, what did that person know that I don't know? Why didn't my plan work?" They learn how to deal with adversity through chess, and that means when they face adversity in other places, they've already got a role model in themselves for how to deal with it. And I saw that over and over again, as I'm sure you did as well. And I'm sure every chess teacher has seen this, that the kids learn how to handle problems, how to overcome obstacles, how to face difficulties with equanimity and optimism. So to me, that was the biggest. That was far more important than the academic parts.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, and it's like it's a good little laboratory. It's a good size lesson for the kids to be able to absorb, learning the both the consequences of their action and the setbacks are inevitable. And one bit of advice that really resonated with me was your point that before you take a kid, when you take a group of kids or a kid to their first tournament, that you should tell them they're going to lose, like let them know. I think that was a really important point, like both for parents and teachers.
Yeah, no, I would slightly rephrase that. I wouldn't tell them they were going to lose.
Right. Yeah, that was not a verbatim quote.
I would prepare them for the probability that they will not win every game.
Yes.
And that they have my permission to lose. It's okay. What they do not have my permission to do is to quit. If we go to a tournament and it's your first tournament, I say, your only goal is to see what the other kids know. Your goal is not to go in there and be Superman. Your goal is just to see what they know. And you write down your moves. We'll look at what they knew that you didn't know, and we'll start working on things little by little. I remember going to a Grandmaster tournament in Manhattan, and Bent Larson was one of the competitors, and he won it. And when the tournament was over, the interviewer said, "So how do you get better at chess?" And he said, "Well, it's really quite simple. You learn one thing really well, then you learn another thing really well, then you learn another thing really well, then you learn another thing really well. And eventually, you just keep doing that. And little by little, you've built up this tremendous background of things that you know really, really well." And so my approach to the children was, it's okay to lose. It's okay to make mistakes. Because that's how you're going to get better. Because once you've made the mistake, you're going to learn something really, really well. And it's going to be important. It's going to matter to you.
Yeah, and there's just no substitute for the school of hard knocks when it comes to
absolutely
chess.
Yes, but they have to be prepared for the idea, which was what you were really leading into. They have to be prepared for there to be problems.
Yeah, and it's still going to be devastating. We all, as tournament players, we all know the devastation.
Yeah.
But at least they have some inkling going in that you're going to feel like an idiot. You just got to keep going.
Yeah, things are not going to work out. But, one of my favorite phrases was, if you haven't failed, it's because you haven't tried.
Yeah. Yeah. And David, our mutual friend of the pod, supporter of the pod, Jay Stallings, sent in a question for you. So Jay, of course, is very well respected, an accomplished chess teacher out in
fabulous.
California, who's been on the podcast some years ago. Listeners should check out that interview from the archives. And Jay asks, he says, "Hi, David. I hope you're enjoying your retirement. We miss seeing you at the national championships. After 30 years of coaching chess, I find that it's more difficult than ever to encourage my students to play chess when not in our weekly meetings. How did you motivate your students to play and study chess at home?"
Wow. Well, first off, Jay, thank you. I miss going to those tournaments too. Those were great fun. Motivating children. Well, I'll tell you, Jay, you're amazing. If you're having a hard time, I'm sure I would too.
Yeah, it's concerning for the rest of us.
Yes. I don't really have, a magic bullet for most problems because they're all very idiosyncratic. They're all very individual. I don't know. I wish I could help you.
One thought that occurred to me in hearing Jay's question is, I actually suspect it might be harder now, because devices are so amazing. The kids have so many ways to distract themselves.
That's true.
When I was a kid, there were hours at a time where I was just terribly bored. And if you gave me a chess book, I would gladly read it, because what else was I going to do?
Right. Yeah.
So I do think that might be part of the problem. I mean, obviously there are these incredible online tools. I mean, even how many years ago did you retire from Dalton, David?
2018.
Okay. Yeah. So obviously the digital tools were in effect by then. Did you have more success getting them to do things digitally? That's obviously a challenge that's only magnified in the subsequent years.
I didn't at that time, but I think your point that there's so many electronic distractions now that really militate against the kind of discipline that's needed to play chess. So I wish I had a nice, clear, bulletproof answer, but I don't. I don't know what they're doing now.
Sounds like you're out of luck, Jay.
I'm sorry. Well, I mean, if Jay is having trouble, Believe
Yeah.
me, everybody else is having trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, with the devices, there are online tools like Chess Kid, which of course is
Oh,
great.
absolutely.
And I know Jay knows all this stuff, but there obviously there have been teachers who've been effective at setting up leaderboards for their clubs and stuff like that. There's certainly you tell some great stories actually in the book about motivating about different things that kids motivated that teachers you knew did to motivate kids.
Yes.
So I'm going to pull a few out of them, and maybe they'll inspire Jay. Although I'm sure if he hasn't read the book yet, he will be. One of them was just this simple idea, and I'm sorry, I don't remember which teacher you credited off the top of your head, but not just doing a point system with kids, but giving them these like astronomical number of points.
That was Matthew Looks. Yes,
Okay.
his point system. A lot of teachers would say, "Okay, you get 3 points for this answer, or 10 points for this answer." Matthew would say, "You get 150 points for this answer. You get 1,000 points for this answer." And he wanted the kids to think big. That was his
Right.
whole idea. Matthew was a brilliant teacher.
Yeah.
But at the end of the week, a kid could have as many as 100,000 points.
Right.
I mean, it's like
It's all
winning the
meaningless,
lottery.
but just inflating the scale gets you.
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
totally see how that would get the kids extreme,
Oh.
like way more excited. Yeah.
It was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. And I also really loved, over the years on the podcast, David, we've talked about, I as a parent have lamented my kids, as I was telling you before we're recording, they're 8 and 11, and they both know the rules of chess, but it hasn't really taken for either one of them.
Mhm.
And I've lamented that, especially with my son, because he seems like a chess player at heart. My daughter less so, not because of gender, just because my son is like super competitive and into games, and my daughter really isn't. But anyway, with my son, I regret that I used to beat him when I was teaching him how to play because I felt like that discouraged him. And this is all a big lead up to your description of Bruce Alberston's Chessmaster 50 game.
Yes.
Could you explain how that one works for parents?
Bruce Alberston was a brilliant master. Absolutely an encyclopedia of chess games. I could never show a game that Bruce couldn't identify on seeing it for 10 seconds or less. But Bruce came up with a brilliant idea how he could play his best as a very strong chess master against an absolute beginner. He created a character that he called Chessmaster 50. And Chessmaster 50 could only capture one piece, and that's the king. Now, that goes against everything we know about chess, but it worked really well for this. So he cannot capture anything. So when the kids caught on to the fact that they could put pieces out where he couldn't take them, they were having a ball, and eventually they would win the game.
I mean, that's how my daughter plays anyway. So she just puts her pieces where they can be taken to begin with. So
Right.
That's why I was thinking, it's perfect for her.
Yeah, but with Chessmaster 50, Bruce got to play strong moves. And,
Right, play your best. Yeah.
And the kids would play terrible moves, but eventually they would get a checkmate. And if you beat Chessmaster 50 3 times, then you graduated to Chessmaster 60. And Chessmaster 60 could take 2 pieces, the king and anybody else he chose. And once you did that, then you were free to go play everybody else. But the great thing about that was when you watch Chessmaster 50, Bruce Alberston, playing a kid, there's a swarm of other kids around watching the game. And they're just having a ball laughing at what's going on.
Right.
And so they're getting really excited by it. And it just became infectious. The whole group, everybody wanted to play Chessmaster 50, and then after that, they wanted to go play each other. So it was a brilliant idea. Bruce was amazing.
I really think it's ingenious. I mean, both
it is
because the other thing is if you're taking it easy on the person you're playing against, it just doesn't feel right. It kind of corrupts the whole experience.
Right.
But in Chessmaster 50, you can still try your hardest. It's
right.
just you've got the very, very large constraints. And, you mentioned Chessmaster 60, and apparently Bruce stopped there. But obviously, you could go even more granular and, have it like leveling up in a game where, okay, now I take 2 pieces. Now I can take 3 pieces.
Right.
And obviously, by taking the king, you mean checkmating, I assume, or was he actually capturing it?
He was actually letting them capture the king. And then he would have to explain later, you don't really do that in a real game.
Okay.
There's one other idea that I would like to pass on for this. When you were talking about when you were playing your son and you were beating him, one of the things that I was suggesting to a lot of people is when you get to an advantageous position, turn the board
Switch.
around.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might have to turn the board around 4 or 5, 6 times, but the kid will still think they won.
Yeah, although they know that you switch the board is the thing.
Yeah.
Like, so I like chess. I have to try it, but I like Chessmaster 50 even better.
Yes.
I'm going to try it with my daughter. And this, David, segues into another question from a Patreon supporter.
Mm-hmm.
So I had sent this to you a couple hours ago. Do you know Evan Rosenberg, by the way?
I don't really know him, no.
Okay. I wasn't sure because he is a New York-based chess master. He was also on the podcast some years ago. He was going for the FM title, although I was corresponding with Evan, and life and parenthood have gotten in the way a little bit, although he is still playing actively. But so Evan writes in and he says, my son just started kindergarten at Dalton. Of course, I'm thrilled that he belongs to such a prestigious and supportive chess program, but I'm also worried that my enthusiasm could easily slip into pressure or bulldozing, and that's the last thing I want to do. I've been the kid who plays in tournaments and I've been the coach, but I've never been the parent before. How do I encourage my son without overreaching?
That's a great question. And I'm reminded of a lecture I heard from a pediatrician talking to a group of about 50 or so parents, and they were asking questions. And one parent asked a question, and the pediatrician said, "Oh, I have a lot of ideas for this. It may be that none of them will work."
Right.
So it's so individual when you're talking about this question. You get somebody like Agassi's father, who was apparently pretty rough on him, and the Williams sisters' father, who they seem to worship him. I had a friend in the Navy who was a saxophone player, and he was just an amazing saxophone player. He went to Juilliard, and he was a very tall guy. And I said, "Did you ever play basketball?" He said, "No, I couldn't." I said, "Why not?" He says, "Because my parents wouldn't let me out of the house until I had practiced for 2 hours." And I said, "How did you feel about that?" And he said, "I hated them." I said, "How do you feel about it now?" And he said, "I worship the ground they walk on." All I can say is, don't put any pressure on the winning and the losing. That's it. Let them know that whatever happens, you love them, and be a loving daddy, and that's it. But I've seen so many really talented kids get burned out because the parents put so much pressure on them, and the kids put so much pressure on themselves. We don't need to add a thing. I don't really have a clear answer for that, but
yeah. And for listeners not familiar, I think most in the U.S. will be, but the Dalton School, an elite private school, very accomplished chess program, of course, most famous because Josh Waitzkin went there. And obviously that was immortalized in Searching for Bobby Fischer, but they've amassed, probably hundreds of national titles since then. This idea of parents pressuring their kids, is that something you saw more at Dalton than at some of the public schools you taught at, or was it equal across the board?
No, I did not see that at Dalton because I had a meeting with the parents at the beginning of every year, and I would explain to them that their job is to love their children, make sure they have they're at the right table, make sure they're fed, make sure they're not playing video games, make sure they're not drinking lots of sodas. My job is the chess.
And that worked.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Well, mostly. There were 1 or 2 exceptions, but they really were rare. The main thing I tried to get the parents on board to understand was that winning and losing are that's going to happen to everybody. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some, and losing is not a terrible thing. And I would tell stories. I'm going to tell a really horrible story here. There was a parent at a school, and he was a half decent player. He was about a 1500 level player, but he thought he was much better. And his son went in to play a game at the national tournament, and he played the a variation of the Lopez. And I had a lesson with him when I realized that that's what he was going to be doing. And I thought, he doesn't really understand this particular variation. And there's a little trick in it where you sacrifice something and then you die. And so I showed the kid this position, and I said, "Can you take the bishop?" And he looked at it for about 5 minutes, and he said, "No." And I said, "Can you tell me without moving the pieces what will happen?" And he walked through the whole thing. He gets to the national tournament, and that exact position shows up, and he snatches off the bishop and dies. He comes back into the team room crying because he's lost in about 8 moves or so. His father grabs him and holds him up against the wall and starts berating him and yelling at him. I mean, it was one of the most frightening things I've seen in chess. And I tell that story to the parents, and I say, that's not why we're here. It's okay to lose. Even if you knew the position and you got excited, it's okay to lose. Don't berate your child if something goes wrong, because it will. I don't care how good you are, things are going to go wrong. The world champion loses games. It's our job. My job is to help them with the chess. Your job is to be a loving parent. And that pretty much killed the pressure from the parents.
That's great. And yeah, that really hits on what to me was like a major theme of the book, which is like the chess that you're teaching, you know, national titles, state titles, whatever, notwithstanding, like it's really secondary, you know.
Yes.
You're really telling the story of these kids learning to manage their emotions and learning to navigate the world. And I love that at the end you have little bios from different kids who you taught along the way, talking about the role that chess played in their lives. Is there anyone whose story, out of all the hundreds, probably thousands of kids you taught, is there anyone whose life story like stands out the most to you?
Wow, the most.
You're going to get everyone mad except for this one person. Everyone who's listening, who's your student, is going to be, why didn't he say me? Except for one.
I don't know that I could single out anybody. I mean, you know, you look at somebody like Evan Alvarez, who's now a project manager at a big engineering firm down in Texas. You look at Quad, who's a vice president of a financial firm. You look at Damien, who's a lawyer and works for IBM. I mean, you look at Jillian, who's managing a high-end restaurant.
And Quad's also on the board of Chess in the Schools, correct?
I believe she is, yes.
Yeah.
Quad, yeah. Quad is, yeah. And Brad, who's doing artificial intelligence. I mean, you know, I look at some of these people and you know, what they've done with their lives. I don't understand what they're doing. They've left me so far behind.
Which is what you want.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. There's nothing better than looking at somebody and thinking, my gosh, look at what you've done.
Yeah. And it's a really nice capstone to an excellent book. And the other capstone, of course, is you tell the story of these kids meeting the president. Like,
yes,
let's hear it.
Well, when we won the national title in Dallas in the year 2000, we got invited to the White House for a special science event where Neil deGrasse Tyson and Marcia McNutt were the honorees. Marcia McNutt is the head of the Monterey Bay Aquarium. Neil deGrasse Tyson is one of the great experts in deep space exploration, and he's the head of the Hayden Planetarium here in New York. And chess being a bit of a science, I guess that was the avenue. So we got invited there. And, you know, to hear the president of the United States acknowledging the 4 kids from the Bronx as being the national chess champions, with a room full of Nobel laureates, astronauts. It was an incredible collection of people. And to have them cheering for these 4 kids from the Bronx was an amazing experience.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
And Bill Clinton did like a meet and greet, or what was the extent of his involvement?
He was Well, he was the president. He was the one who invited us,
Yeah.
and he talked to us. I mean, he actually spent time with us. Whatever one might think of politics, the man has definitely got charisma and knowledge, and he was just wonderful. Yeah, he was amazing.
Amazing. Well, David, again, great book. Really enjoyed it. You already touched on some chess improvement advice in your Bent Larson story, but in the hundreds of kids that you taught and saw grow over the years, like what do you consider to be the most crucial components to getting better at chess?
Wow, perseverance.
That pretty much sums it up.
I think that's what it is. Perseverance.
Yeah. More so than which book you read,
Yes.
which tactics trainer you use. Yeah. Yeah. Well said. The setbacks.
Love the game and study as much as you can.
Yeah. Well said. And so these days you're retired from Dalton.
Yes.
But somehow you're like you're a photographer. What else is keeping you busy?
Oh, catching up on all the reading that I haven't been able to do for the last 30 years because I was so busy teaching.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yes, I'm having a wonderful time catching up. I've got books on my library that I've had for years and years and years, and I'm finally getting to read them. It's wonderful. Yes.
Sounds pretty good to me.
And I have a photo studio, so I'm doing a lot of pictures.
Do you use film or?
No.
Okay.
All digital.
The age we live in.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, one last plug that I'd love for you to give, just because it's something you mentioned in the book, and it's something that is important to me too, because whenever I interview chess educators, which I always do and I always enjoy, I do, like you, firmly believe that chess is a fantastic educational tool. But you also stress in the book that you think all these other extracurriculars, the arts and sports and so on, are also crucial. What would you say generally about sort of the value of extracurriculars for our kids?
I think it's essential. I think chess is the best one. But, I did a lot of athletics when I was a kid. I was on the track team. I played football. I did judo in the Navy. I love sports. That's wonderful stuff. But and dance, the arts, all of these things are really, really important for kids to do, because, if all you're doing is going to school and learning what they're teaching you with the math and the science and the reading and the social studies and all these things, and those are really important. I don't want to denigrate that for a minute. Everyone needs a lot of excellence in all of those areas. But kids also need something extra that they can feel good about, that they've accomplished, something that they've done. If you have won a dance competition or even participated in a dance competition, you've done more than somebody else has. You've got something inside you that you can point to. If you're doing ceramics and you've made a wonderful piece of art, it doesn't. I won't say it doesn't matter what you're doing. But it almost doesn't. The important thing is to do something, do something that stimulates the mind. There was a study done not long ago where some scientists talked to some young kids in kindergarten and found that every one of them had an interest in things that are scientific. By the time they were in the middle school, none of them did. Maybe not none, but very few. In other words, we taught the science out of them.
Yeah.
So kids need something extra. They need to have the mind stimulated outside of the normal things.
Yeah, and some kids are not academically oriented, or they haven't found that subject that grabs them. And to find that thing that they want organically, intrinsically to get better at, and to see that when they work at it, they get better.
Yes,
is such an incredible skill.
A sense of mastery is essential.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. And actually, hearing you mention precipitation, not precipitation. Um, one more bit of advice that really resonated with me, or one more reflection, was your take on giving trophies for precipitation in tournaments. Do you remember what you wrote in the book?
Yes. At the Browning School, they gave a tournament to anybody who was playing in their very first tournament.
A trophy, yeah.
They gave a trophy. They give a trophy to anyone who was playing in their very first tournament. And I think that's a really good idea. That's sort of a courage award.
Yeah. Well,
but after that, you got to earn the hardware.
Yeah, that's perfect.
First time out, okay.
Yeah.
But, when you win one game out of 4 and you get a trophy, that's silly.
Yeah. And so not everyone gets, because as you said in the book, like they really are, it's very daunting as whether you're a kid or an adult to show up at your first tournament, this unknown social environment, to sort of put your ego on the line,
right.
Even though we would say this is not a reflection of your self-worth. You still feel like it is every time you set up the pieces. So I do agree, especially kids do love trophies. So the idea of giving them one for their first, I love, but for every tournament they play, it totally defeats the purpose eventually.
Yeah. And that really accelerates the value of the ones that do win a trophy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, excellent, David. If I had a trophy, I would give it to you for this book and for your service to so many kids through the years, and for teaching me a thing or two about teaching chess all those years ago. Any closing thoughts before we say goodbye?
No, well, first off, thank you very much for having me. But I really enjoyed writing that book because it took me back to the years that were really the most important years of my life, the most transformational years of my life, working with those kids in the Bronx. It was just the most fulfilling thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
And it was important to me to write the book. And fortunately, I'd taken copious notes during the events. So I was able to recount things, I think, fairly accurately as they actually happened.
That's great. Yeah, there is vivid detail throughout. Yeah, and I'm sure that obviously having a family while all of this was going on, which you don't even talk about in the book, I'm sure it was some lightly slept nights along the way.
Many. Yes, many long days.
Yeah,
and many weeks with no break.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, there's lots more that we didn't get to, so definitely recommend Sunrise in the Bronx for everyone listening. I know a lot of you are always looking for chess-related bedtime reading, and this is that. So thank you, David. Great to catch up, and congrats on the book.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Okay.